Draw your last pathetic card so I can end this, Yugi.
My grandpa's deck has no pathetic cards, Kaiba. But it does contain the unstoppable Exodia. I've assembled all 5 special cards, all 5 pieces of the puzzle. Exodia, obliterate!
So I'm going to make a video today talking about Flesh and Blood, and I'm going to be comparing Flesh and Blood, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! And I want to talk about Flesh and Blood because it's the game that I've been playing the most in person for quite some time now, about a year. I still play a lot of Pokemon, and I still play... Pokemon is the one I play the least. The most I play other than Flesh and Blood is going to be Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm going to be comparing a lot these two games because I play Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot mostly online, and I don't play it in person anymore, and I'm going to be talking again about why. And I'm going to be comparing it to Flesh and Blood, which is a very beloved game that's growing a lot, and it's pretty new. I think it's been around for 2 or 3 years now, and it's been growing a lot the last year. Pretty much when I go to my local card shop here, the only tournaments that I see are Flesh and Blood, and I'll see some Magic in there. They don't hold Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments anymore. There's very few people playing Yu-Gi-Oh! The only people who seem to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh! They're either on Dueling Book or they're going to be on Master Duel. And there's a few reasons for that, and I want to be talking about why. First of all, what I want to say is that if you disagree with me, that's great. If you like Yu-Gi-Oh! And you don't like Flesh and Blood, or you like the things that I'm going to be criticizing about Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's totally fine. This is coming from a place from somebody who does play the game and still actively plays the game a lot at a semi-competitive level, right? I play a lot of ranked on Master Duel. Don't play it in person. I'm going to be talking about exactly why. Flesh and Blood was a game that I picked up in literally 30 minutes to an hour, and I've been playing it ever since, and it was enjoyable from the very first game that I played all the way up until I really understood how the game worked. And that is a problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! That I notice, is the game is not enjoyable up until you really understand how the game works, and you become not a casual anymore. Even if people like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, they like to call each other casual. But if you really know how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works and you're not having to read every card anymore, and you kind of have a understanding of everything that the opponent is activating, you're not a casual anymore. Like, I hate to break it to you, you're way beyond being a casual. So I'm going to be talking about that. And I'm sorry, I am going to be criticizing how Yu-Gi-Oh! Has changed over the years, which I've done in other videos, but I thought that this would be cool to talk about more about what I like about Flesh and Blood and why I think that this game honestly has surpassed Yu-Gi-Oh! In many ways and why it's so popular. Why is this important? Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Has lost a lot of players during the years. It doesn't seem to gain a whole lot of new players. I don't find anyone that, hey, I learned how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Yesterday. I've been loving it and I've been playing it a lot. You saw a lot of that with Master Duel, but it was mostly appealing to returning players, and most of those players did not stay. I know that card shops don't hold a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Products anymore. I don't see tournaments. I know it's a very popular game in Asia, and it's just not as popular in North America. Take from that what you will. I particularly like Flesh and Blood more to play in person. And this is not so much criticizing just Yu-Gi-Oh! It's more going to be highlighting the positives about Flesh and Blood. So first of all, I'm not going to sit here and just actually explain to you how Flesh and Blood works and how to play it. Maybe that's a separate video that I should do because there's not a lot of Flesh and Blood content out there. It's a fairly new game, so not a lot of that out there, and there is no digital game. Actually, the intention of this game, the reason why it's called Flesh and Blood, is my understanding, is because they want you to play in Flesh and Blood in person. They never want to make a digital version of the game. I hope that changes because I do like digital versions of games. But so let's start with why I think Flesh and Blood is so good and what is so interesting about it. And what are the things that they've done very well to where you can pick up this game in like 1 or 2 hours and you're already going to know how everything works, and there's not going to be a whole lot of nuance between different decks that you're going to be playing, in the sense of a whole lot of new things you're going to have to learn. Now, keep in mind, the deck that I'm showing is one of the decks that I play here, which is going to be a Katsu deck. This deck has effects that are very streamlined as well and are simple, but other decks have their versions of their streamlined effects as well. Like, this is a combo deck, and I'm going to be talking about that. So just to give you just a very quick general idea and overview of how the game works, this is a hero-centered game, right? So versus different from like Yu-Gi-Oh!, where it's similar to Pokemon in the sense where you're going to have one monster, creature, or hero battling at one time, versus Yu-Gi-Oh! You're going to have multiple, and it's basically Yu-Gi-Oh! Being 2 summoners or 2 players that are trying to kill each other's life points with their monsters. You essentially are the hero, the monster in this game. So your life points, quote unquote, are going to be the ones from that hero card. So this is why it stays centered. All the equipments, they are not different monsters. All the cards on the deck are going to be spells and attacks and equipments that this hero is going to use. So there's not 2 heroes in your deck, 3 heroes. It doesn't work like that. So very easy to understand right off the bat. Again, I'm not going to sit here and explain to you how everything about the game works, but just so you have an idea of what's going on. If you think about a hero is going to have a helmet. He's going to have weapons he's going to hold. He's going to have like a chest plate, some sort of armor, maybe a shield. And that's what these equipments are. And they're going to go in different spots in areas of the hero. And everything is going to generate and center around this hero. And as you can see, there's different cards, which would be attacks. And there's the equivalent of like spells and things like that. Right off the bat, I'm going to show you this card right here, Surging Strike. So this is a pretty good card. It is very crucial and essential to this deck. Number one thing I really like about this game, it sticks to their archetypes, okay? When you have a Katsu deck, all of your cards are generating around Katsu, and there is a coherent theme for the game. One thing that I've criticized on Yu-Gi-Oh! That I made a video called the loss of Yu-Gi-Oh's artistic essence, is that you have too many different types of things going on where the game is not only unrecognizable, but it gets a little weird because you'll have like mechs fighting puppies, fighting waifus, fighting demons, fighting fish. You know, it's very weird. And a lot of decks end up, to be viable, they end up falling on what a lot of people call like a soup. So it is very hard to stick to your quote-unquote archetype, which a lot of people have talked about, and I'll mention this a little more, but just to give a quick example, like let's say a card that is widely used by every deck or almost every deck, like let's say Ash Blossom or Max C, right? Why would a little lolly be randomly put in the middle of like a fish deck? Like why does a fish deck have something like Max C on it? Just speaking aesthetically. It artistically, it makes no sense. It's completely incoherent from an aesthetic standpoint, right? Something like Triple Tactics, that's clearly something that a Shogun would be using, like a samurai, right? It's a command card. That should be in like a warrior deck. Why would that be randomly in a deck of reptiles or a deck of dinosaurs, on a deck of sharks, or in a deck of like anything else? Like it doesn't make sense. Like it's artistically incoherent at this point. Flesh and Blood, everything makes sense. If there you have a deck of warriors, if you have like a Katsu deck, which is a ninja, all the cards, they're going to make sense to be in that deck, artistically and aesthetically speaking. You're not going to have a random lolly in the middle of a Katsu deck, right? You're not going to have like a random bug, like a Max C, that's like a couple drawers or something in the middle of like a freaking Warlock deck. It's just not going to happen because everything is artistically coherent and everything aesthetically makes sense. And that's the thing artistically that I like about Flesh and Blood, is because the entire deck centers around your hero. While there are some cards that might not be directly relating to that theme, it's rare. Most cards make sense. Like you can look at them and like you see Katsu on the picture. Okay, this belongs to a ninja deck. Okay, these are ninja swords. They belong to the ninja deck. This looks like Katsu on the picture. This is probably one of his moves, right? Because they are part and they fit in a theme. So there is no soup decks on Flesh and Blood, at least that I know of. Most decks, they are very coherent and they have a theme. Now, aesthetically, for new people looking at the game, they can look at it and it makes sense. Okay, this looks like some sort of samurai that's fighting against some sort of warlock or some sort of warrior. And every attack and card that they're using seem to fit around that theme, both artistically and how they play. And I think that that's very important. I don't like soup decks, and most people don't like them. Like if I'm playing an X-Saber deck on Yu-Gi-Oh!, I don't like the fact that I have to throw in like cards that are not X-Sabers there. If I'm playing like a 6 Samurai deck, I don't like putting cards that aren't 6 Samurais in there. And I know that most people are like that. I like Team APS. I like Paul a lot, and Trell, and all the people that are a part of that channel. And one thing that Paul talks a lot about, I've heard him say, he doesn't like soup decks. And I relate a lot to that because I don't like it either. He feels the same way, that he wants to play the deck the way the deck was intended to be played, like within its archetype and within the interactions of its own archetype. And I feel very strongly about that too. I hate soup decks. And one thing that Flesh and Blood does not do is these stupid soup decks where you got to mix multiple cards that don't fit the theme. And this is just like from an aesthetic and artistic standpoint, just point number one that I really like about Flesh and Blood. Everything in your deck fits a theme. Number two, I'm going to talk about the notorious wall of text that Yu-Gi-Oh has. I'm going to give my opinion on this because I think that it's very important, and Pokemon does a great job of this as well. In Magic, it's been a long time since I've played Magic, but I believe Magic does a pretty good job of this too. But one thing I like about Flesh and Blood is while there's a lot of nuance to the game is very streamlined. It is very easy to pick up any deck and just start playing. And the reason for that, again, I'll draw your attention to this card, Surging Strike. What is this is a very good card. It's a pretty key card in the deck. And just by looking at it, you wouldn't understand why. But look at the effect. Like, you have just all the cards, just to explain this to you how it works. On the upper left corner, you're going to see the amount that you can basically discard the card for and gain that amount in mana. So it has an energy system, which I think is super important for a game to have an energy system. Otherwise, it just spirals out of control and gets crazy, especially if you add power creep in there in a model that doesn't have seasons like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just a recipe for an eventual craziness and disaster. On the upper right corner, you're going to see the cost of the card. On the bottom left card, you're going to see the damage. On the bottom right, you're going to see the block of the card. All of that is standard. Every card has that, similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! How we have attack, defense, attribute. The real meat and potatoes of how the game is not annoying and overly complicated is on the white here, where the effect of the card would go. So as you can see, the only thing this card says is go again. That is a very good effect, and it's very obvious why it's important for combos is because you don't just use the card. When you use it, you get to activate something else. And the cards, they essentially chain with each other. Now, obviously, not every card is this simple and straightforward. This is probably like a really basic example that I chose. While this card is very good and it is very key for the deck, most cards have a little more text than that. But they have this feature where it's a streamlined effect, which Pokemon shares on as well. I'll give you another example here. For my deck, so it's a combo deck. So you're going to see something that says here combo on Whelming Gustav, this next card that I'm showing. And it does have a little more text. But it starts by saying combo. And there are multiple of these streamlined effects on Flesh and Blood that are very recognizable and make it so it's very easy to just read what it does really quick and move on with the game. Much like Pokemon, like there are different effects that different cards do and damage values and things like that, but pretty much a burn effect is a burn effect. A paralyzed effect is a paralyzed effect. A confusion effect is a confusion effect. So if this applies confusion, this applies burn, like we already know what it does. We don't have to read a wall of text, 3 paragraphs of the 5 different effects of what this card does. It's like it deals 80 damage and it applies burn on the enemy Pokemon. Okay, that's pretty easy. Same thing with Whelming Gustav. Whelming Gustav is going to apply 2 damage and it's a combo. And it does mention some other nuances, but all that these nuances are is because it's a combo deck. So it's basically saying that if I use Surging Strike previously on the chain to then use this card, it gains an additional effect. So the cards combo on each other, because again, this is a combo deck, so the idea behind this deck is drawing the right cards to go ahead and complete these sequences of attacks and deal more damage in one turn, right? Versus in Yu-Gi-Oh, it is not streamlined. The effects have very specific nuances. While there are types of cards, the types like Ritual, Continuous, Quick Effect, Normal Spell, Continuous Spell, Equipment Spell, there is that. When you read an effect, there is no like every card that has this word in bold and black does the same thing. It has some of that, like removing, sending to the graveyard, but it also has nuances where it will say things like destroy and remove, destroy and send to the graveyard, remove face down, which are very specific nuanced things that you have to keep track of that do cause repercussions and trigger the effects of other cards that could be used in response. It's very different to send a card to the graveyard or remove, or destroy and remove, destroy and send to the graveyard. That will trigger certain cards that can be activated in response or trigger the effects of different things. Now, there is an aspect of that is cool, and this is a very minute example, but generally speaking, what I'm saying is when you look at a Yu-Gi-Oh card, if you're at a casual level, if you don't know what every single card does, you do have to sit there and read the entire card. And Yu-Gi-Oh has very long combos. Think about a deck that's just any combo deck. If you are new to the game, or not even new, you know how to play the game, but you're not within the meta, you don't know what every single thing does, you're either going to accept that somebody is able to cheat on you if they feel like, or you're going to have to sit there and read every single card. And I get it. Oh, you just don't like reading. That's not the problem. A lot of times it's your opponent doing that. So you're trying to play and you have this train of thought, this process and this line of thought that you're trying to do and this sequence of events, and you keep getting interrupted by your opponent having to read your cards and understand how they work and arguing about the nuances and the how effects are playing off of each other. Oh, I do this. Okay, this combos with this and activates this. Okay, activate this. Well, that only does this, so it doesn't activate this. Okay, call the judge. Okay, well, once we did that, okay, now continue where I picked up from. Now I'm going to do a deck search, and this procs this. This sends this to the graveyard. So then I summon this, and when this gets summoned, I get to special summon this. When this gets special summoned, activates an effect that I can bring from the graveyard. When this card is brought from the graveyard, I can bring this from my deck. And then you know what I'm saying? Like, if you were to actually have to stop and you didn't know how every single deck works and what all these cards are doing, if you have to stop and try to understand what every single of these interactions is doing in every wall of text and how it affects the game, it is not enjoyable to be played in person anymore. And even if you're not the one having to sit there and read, if you have to sit there and wait for someone who, then that's why I say Yu-Gi-Oh is only fun if you are playing at a competitive level right now. I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is only for competitive people. Even if you don't consider me or someone else a competitive player, because like you're not playing in Worlds or whatever, or you're not on Master Tier or whatever the hell, if you don't have to sit there and read what most of the cards do and try to understand what your opponent is doing, like, I'm sorry to tell you, you're just not a casual anymore. You are at a semi or at a competitive level at this point. Because most people, if they are not living and breathing the game, they do have to stop and try to understand what the opponent's cards are doing. Even if you're just doing a quick read, you have to sit there and read every single thing. So the game, unfortunately, Yu-Gi-Oh can only be enjoyed honestly by two people who really know how the game and the meta is working right now. If you get one player that really knows and the other player is more new to the game or is a returning player or is kind of not as experienced as you, you're going to annoy the other player because they're going to have to sit there and explain to you how every single thing works. They're going to have to basically give you a lecture, or they're going to have to sit there and wait for you to read every single one of their cards. And I don't know about you, I hate having my train of thought broken. When I'm in the motion of doing something, I hate having like these interruptions and these pauses and having to pick up where I left off from and trying to understand what I was trying to do. It breaks the flow of the game. Not just your train of thought, but the flow and the continuity of the game. Like Flesh and Blood is a very fluid game. Like I'll do my turn, you'll do your turn. There's different phases like Yu-Gi-Oh, but pretty much there's not as much interruption. Like it's not as annoying. Like the opponent is not playing on your turn, right? Combos are not as long and there's no like it's our main phase, like your turn is your turn, my turn is my turn, my graveyard is my graveyard, your graveyard is your graveyard, because my cards are not going to work on your cards are not going to work on mine. And even when you have cards like, let's say this card here, Alliance Strike, which is a really good card too, you see, okay, this card has a little more text, right? It has 3 effects. Oh, well, it's starting to look like a Yu-Gi-Oh card because it has 3 effects. Well, you have to choose one of these effects. So only one of these lines is going to be what you're going to choose to use. So your opponent doesn't have to account now, well, when this card is in the graveyard, one of these 3 effects can be activated. And if it's in your deck, if it's summoned this way or that way, if this happens, like not all of these effects apply. Just the one line that you choose to use is what's going to apply. So even when it's a little more complex or nuanced of what you can do, it keeps it simple enough so that you tell your opponent really quick, okay, it has 3 effects. I get to choose one of those 3 effects. It's not going to apply all 3 of these effects, right? You can choose one of them. And that keeps things streamlined. Or again, like I told you, a card that has combo. Every card that does combo is the same thing. Like obviously they're going to have nuances of what happens if you trigger the combo status or combo effect. Like what does your card do special when this is procced? That's fine. But pretty much every card, if it says combo on it, we know what combo means. Okay, if this card procs a combo, we all know what that means. And the same thing with other effects. We all know what go again means. The same thing with other cards for other decks that are not combo decks. Once you understand what that effect does, every time you see that effect on different cards, it's easy to understand what's going on and you don't have to keep re-explaining. I don't have to sit there and read every single wall of text on your deck to understand the nuance of the 3 effects you're activating. You're going to activate a card and it has one streamlined status effect that applies to all cards that have the same status effect. And that is super important. I think Pokemon did that very well. And I think that Flesh and Blood picked up on that too. My understanding is that Magic does as well. I don't remember. Again, it's been a while since I played Magic. But I think that that's very important. The reason for that is because it makes it easy not only to continue the game and move the flow of the game, but it helps new players as well. Like, I picked up this game in like 1 or 2 hours. I went to a card shop. I saw they were having a tournament. Pretty much it was like 2 people playing Magic, nobody playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Someone was playing some other anime game that I don't know what it was. And then the entire place was playing a Flesh and Blood tournament. And I sat down with the owner of the store. The guy was super cool. Took an hour to teach me how the game works. And within that same day, I was already playing Armory with people. And the community of this game is really, really nice. I made a lot of friends playing this game. Like, the community is extra nice that plays this game. And it's not annoying to play with other people, especially if they're newer, because the game is so streamlined that there is not that much for you to understand or that you have to explain. Everything is written in a way that's very clear and straightforward and easy to understand. So even if you're playing against a player who is significantly better than you, you're probably going to have a good time, and they will likely have a good time as well. They're not going to have to spend an entire afternoon explaining to you the nuances of the 10 effects of the card that they just used, right? So people from different skill levels, even if obviously one is going to win because they have that much more knowledge, experience, and skill, it's not going to be annoying for the other player because everything is very straightforward and easy to understand. There is going to be a skill difference. Obviously, one is probably going to win over the other, but you're not going to feel like you got cheated or like you had to spend an entire afternoon reading your opponent's deck. It's really easy to understand what things are doing. That makes it easier to play in person. That gives the game a flow that I'm a very big fan of. Things that you're doing often don't get interrupted. Again, I keep saying flow. The game just has a natural flow to it, and it doesn't matter if I'm a veteran and you're not. We're pretty much both going to be playing at this almost at the same speed and understanding. You're going to get what I'm doing, and I'm going to get what you're doing. I'm not going to have to explain a whole lot about how my deck works. It's pretty easy to just look at it and understand. The text is not that long. And because we have these streamlined effects that kind of apply the same to all cards, it is very easy for someone that's new or playing against something that they've never played before to understand what's going on pretty quick. Even if there's an effect that is unique to that hero or that deck that you're playing against, the opponent's only going to have to explain it once or twice, and you're going to catch on to what it does because it's pretty similar. Like, if you were to play against my deck, like, and you've, for whatever, everybody knows Katsu deck, and it's pretty easy to understand, but if you've never played it and I explain to you, well, a combo basically works that if I activate another card the turn before, that is the card mentioned here, it's going to activate an effect. Okay, cool. Okay, so I use this card, go again. That's pretty easy, right? You understand what going again means. It just means that I can go again. Okay, now I affect this card. So it's a combo with this card. Oh, okay, so now I understand what that means. It basically means that if you activated a card that mentions on the other card that it procs a combo, there's going to be an effect. So I don't have to explain to you everything. You already got it. The only thing I have to explain now, okay, so when there is a combo, which you already know what it is, this happens. And it's very easy. It just adds 1 damage to the card. Like, that's it. It's not... When I activate this card, it activates 3 different effects. So one that removes your card, the other one that makes me draw a random card to my hand, and then I pick 1 of 5 cards in your hand without looking at it, and I remove it face down to the graveyard. Now, if that card was a magic card, I get to go ahead and search my deck for a level 8 monster, then that gets special summoned, and when this card gets special summoned, I bring these other 2 cards from the graveyard. Now I get to, you know what I mean? Like I mean, the thing is, I wish I was exaggerating, but that's how Yu-Gi-Oh is. And you can say, oh, it's because Yu-Gi-Oh is a game for smart people and this game seems like it's a game for dumb people. Like, not only is that elitist, because you're talking to someone that plays both games, right? I'm not saying that one is better than the other. What I am saying is that by streamlining things, the game is a lot more fluid, the games don't take as long, and it's enjoyable to play against and with people at all skill levels. And that's what I'm saying. Yu-Gi-Oh is not fun to play against people who don't know what they're doing. And Yu-Gi-Oh is not enjoyable if you don't really know what you're doing, and you don't just have to understand what your cards do in Yu-Gi-Oh. You have to know what the opponent's deck is. If you're for the first time playing against like a Kashtira deck, if it's the first time you're playing against a Tearlaments deck, and you're really trying to understand, prevent your opponent from cheating, and you're really trying to understand how a Tearlaments deck works, dude, like, that's like an afternoon of reading all the cards and understanding everything that a Tearlament deck does. Nothing like that exists in Flesh and Blood or in Pokemon. Like, you're not going to spend an afternoon trying to understand your opponent's deck. And you may say again, like, oh, it's because it's a game that's not for dumb people, right? Yu-Gi-Oh is for smart people. That's fine. But even if you're the smart one, if you're playing against someone who, I'm not even going to use the word smart, but doesn't know the nuances of your deck and is trying to learn as they play with you, you're going to have to sit there and explain to them, give them a lecture, or wait for them to read every single one of your cards, and it's just boring. Like, I find myself in the middle of Yu-Gi-Oh games, like, I'll be on my phone a lot. Like, I can't play Yu-Gi-Oh without being on, like, my phone, like on Facebook or something, or Instagram, or playing a mobile game, because it's almost like you have to do two things at once. When I'm playing Master Duel even, which is a lot quicker, Master Duel is way quicker because the computer keeps track of things, I still am like listening to YouTube or doing something else on the side, because there is so much time where you wait for your opponent to try to understand what they're doing, that unless you're at a rank and playing against someone that's at a certain level, it's not enjoyable. And I feel like a game needs to be enjoyable. If an expert is playing against a newbie, the game has to be enjoyable enough to where both of us can have fun. Like, it can't be like it's not fun unless I'm playing with someone that's at my exact same skill level. It can't just be fun for competitive players. Like, it has to be fun for casual players too. It has to be easy enough to pick up to where you're not intimidating new players from coming in. Like, how many of you have friends that you try to explain how Yu-Gi-Oh works and they're just like, yeah, this is too complicated, fuck it. You know what I mean? That's been my experience. Like, I try to explain how it works, and you ease them into it by showing the classic cards, and it's almost like a bait, because they get how the classic game works, and then you start introducing them to current Yu-Gi-Oh! And Synchros, and Links, and XYZs, and how things work now. And then they're just like, okay, this was interesting at first, like I was getting it, now I'm totally fucking lost. That's been my experience. Flesh and Blood doesn't have that. It's not going to get that much more complicated as you get more experienced. You're going to learn more nuances, and you're going to tune your deck and know how to do different things, but it's not going to be that much more complicated. You know what I mean? It's not going to take you an afternoon to learn how to play the game. And I think that that's super, super, super important, because even if you like the way the game is, the fact of the matter is not that many new players are coming into the game. Thankfully, we had Master Duel that brought a lot of new players, but that's only going to last so long. For a game to continue to grow and stay alive, and people from all ages and skill levels to be able to enjoy it, it has to be complex enough to where expert players can have a good time, and it has to be streamlined, not easy enough, streamlined enough to where new players can pick up the game fairly quick and understand and already play against their friends. And it has to be fluid enough to where it's not annoying, and it can continue to be played in person. I think that Yu-Gi-Oh is missing one or several of these components, to where the game used to have a flow that it doesn't have anymore. There's too many interruptions. There's too many, you playing on my turn. Like, have you played against like a deck of, it's pretty much every deck, or tier elements, but let's say for example, like a labyrinth deck. Like, a labyrinth deck is going to be playing a lot on your turn. And whether or not you're okay with that, it gets annoying for most people. Like, it's really annoying to be trying to play, and then your opponent activates something, and all of a sudden, like, they just played their entire turn for half an hour. Now they're playing on your turn, and it feels like you never get to play. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh is centered around making the game not fun for your opponent. And a game should never be centered around that. You're trying to, like floodgate decks, you're trying to prevent your opponent from being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh. You're trying to lock the board. You're trying to, like, I used to play an X-Saber deck where it was a hand control deck. My entire objective was, and I still play that in Edison format. Like, my entire thing is to make it so you don't have cards in your hand to where you can't play the game. Like floodgates decks, you're trying to prevent you're trying to make an unbreakable board to where your opponent can't summon and can't do anything. While it might be funny for you and fun for you, it's really annoying for the person playing against you. And it needs to be enjoyable and have like a solid, constant back and forth between both players. Like, no Flesh and Blood game is decided on turn one. That's another problem with Yu-Gi-Oh right now. Games get decided on the first turn a lot of times. No Flesh and Blood game or Pokemon game get decided on turn one. That is not fun. Like, OTK decks are not fun to play against, or honestly to play. Might be fun to play with, but that gets old. If you're always winning on turn one with a deck, you're going to get bored of the game very quick, right? there needs to be a back and forth, and both players need to feel like the game could be turned at any point. That's another very important thing. Both players need to feel like the game could turn at any point. There cannot be a deck that basically allows you to lock your opponent out from playing the game before they've ever been able to make their first move. Like, that is not fun. And there's a lot of decks that do that, and pretty much most good Yu-Gi-Oh decks currently are centered around turn 1 wins. Like, if your deck cannot do a million things on turn 1 and lock your opponent out of playing the game on turn 1, you don't have a good Yu-Gi-Oh deck. And I think that that's toxic is not the right word. Like, that's just unhealthy. It's not fun or good for the game. Like, you, because you know how the game works, because you are used to this and you're in this realm where this is normal, you might not have a problem with it. But I'm trying to invite you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not in this realm. They're just spectating the game. They're considering playing the game, where it's their first time playing against someone who is a lot better than them. If they don't even feel like they ever had a chance to even play the game on turn 1, like, why would they keep playing the game? You know what I mean? It needs to be enjoyable for the new person too, or for the worst player. Like, you have to feel like you had a chance. You have to be able to play your cards at least on turn 2, man. Like, it's just not fun playing against turn 1 decks or decks that prevent you from playing the game, which is pretty much every deck currently. So that is my opinion why I think Flesh and Blood is so good. Again, it streamlines a lot of the effects, so you don't have to spend that much time reading everything. It gives a flow to the game. Nobody's playing on your turn for extended periods of time, and if they are, it's just something they activated, which is very rare. Turns are pretty quick. The games are fairly quick. It's pretty simple to understand, and when you get to competitive level, it's even more fun, but it's just as enjoyable to play with new people. And if you're trying to teach someone to play the game, it's not going to take like a series of lectures in the afternoon. It's going to be like a quick half hour to an hour to understand how this game works. Like, it's one game, you already know how to play it. I think that that's super important. I think that this is why this is probably the top game right now, at least to be played in person. As far as the TCGs, if you've never played Flesh and Blood, don't be intimidated by it, because it takes like 30 to 60 minutes to learn how to play it. It is really fun. The other thing is cost. Okay, I didn't mention this, but I think that this is super important too. This card that I'm holding here, at least at the time that I started playing the game, it was one of the more expensive cards, like 120 bucks. But that is like one of the most expensive cards in the game, right? Versus 120 bucks for a Yu-Gi-Oh card is nothing. There's cards that cost hundreds of dollars, and there's several decks that have several cards, especially the staples, that cost hundreds of dollars. Most of these cards, like all the ones that you're seeing right here, they're free. Like, the store gave them to me for free, or they cost cents. It's not dollars even. It's like pennies how much these cards cost. And there's replacements for everything. Like, you don't have to have Mask of Momentum. There are other cards that will replace this card that cost like $1, $5, like 30 cents, 25 cents. That's the range of price we're talking. Like, it's not an expensive game to pick up and play. The most expensive cards are usually going to be equipments, and you can switch these equipments if you're newer and you still want to see if you like the game. You can switch these equipments out for things that don't do a whole lot less or a whole lot more. You know what I mean? This right here was like the biggest investment I had to make, and I made it like well into the game. Most of my deck at first, like my deck, like each card cost a few cents, or I got them for free, or the guys gave them to me because they're free. I don't understand why Yu-Gi-Oh is such an expensive game and why it always has been an expensive game. It is inaccessible for most people. And even people who have money, like, no offense, dude, if you're spending, unless you're like going to tournaments and stuff, and I don't want to judge what people do with their money, but it's not the wisest financial decision that you can make. Even if you're rich, like, are you going to spend like a few $100s on a piece of cardboard? Like, really? I mean, even if you're thinking from like a humanitarian standpoint, like, dude, donate the money. Like, even if you don't need it, if you don't want to invest the money or buy something more important with it, like, there's people there that could eat for like a week or a month with what your deck costs. Like, it's almost like, it's not insulting because everybody's entitled to do what they want with their money, but come on, it's pretty ridiculous how much it costs to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, how much it costs to stay with the meta. This game is not like that. There's nothing like that, right? And it's not even like Pokemon, where there's a rarity standpoint where like it has a collector value. Like, I understand like Pokemon has cards that have a collection value, but you don't have to partake in that. To just enjoy the game and play the game, it's not that expensive. It is more expensive than Flesh and Blood, but again, that's the same criticism I have for Pokemon as Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is crazy expensive to stay in the meta. Flesh and Blood is not like that. So it's very accessible from a financial standpoint. It's very accessible from, I'm not going to say an IQ standpoint, but it's easy to pick up. If you're not lazy is not the right word either. If you don't want to spend an entire afternoon learning how to play a game, you just want to play it really quick for half an hour, you can learn in half an hour how to play the game. If you don't want to have to, if you're going to play against people who are not at your same skill level and you get annoyed by having to lecture people and teach them how every single thing in your deck works, you're not going to have to do that with this game. If you're a newer player that gets intimidated by playing with people and you don't want to annoy other people because you're like, I don't want him to feel annoyed like he's having to play with me, dude, go to a Flesh and Blood armory, even if you're new, because A, most people are extremely nice to play the game, and B, you're not going to have that hard of a time understanding how the game works. Like, it's not that complicated compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not even that quote-unquote complicated, but you do have to read a lot and spend a lot of time, and that's my thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if you're extremely smart and you get how the entire game works, you cannot predict what another card does and understand what it does without reading it, because nothing is streamlined. So you do have to spend however long it's going to take you to read that wall of text and account for different nuances that are comboing with that wall of text. Doesn't matter how smart you are, it's going to take time. It's going to interrupt the flow of the game. Flesh and Blood has none of that. So I highly recommend that game. I'm not saying one game is better than the other. You can't like one or you have to like one or the other. I play both. They're both good at what they do. I just think that this game is much more accessible and I enjoy playing it a lot more in person. And I don't know, I think they did a fantastic job. My area here, it is very popular. It's the most popular card game that's being played in person. I don't know everywhere in the country, here in the US or in other countries, but if you never tried it, I highly recommend. It is not expensive to get into it at all. It is not difficult to pick up on how the game works. And I might do some tutorials in the future, but that's not really my goal of this channel. Like, I'm not really here trying to teach people how to play the game. There might be people that are actually even better suited to teach you how the game works than me. And again, I don't think it fits with the vibe of the channel, to be honest, but I might do it at some point because I really would like more people to get into this game. I would like to see it grow and become more popular because I do think that it's the best game to be played in person right now for TCGs.